morning. We are continuing with chapter 4, learning about the early Ojibwe. We're going to start by reviewing those key terms that are coming through our chapter. So let's look at what is a wigwam. Katie.
It's a dome-shaped house that the Ojibwe used.
Yeah, it's the dome-shaped house that they lived in. We know the Dakota lived in the teepee, which was cone-shaped. The wigwam is a dome shape. And instead of covering it with animal hide like the teepees were covered, what did they cover a wigwam with, Caitlin?
Birch bark.
The birch bark. So they used the birch bark to cover up their wigwams. They were a little bit more stable. They didn't take them down and move them quite as much as the Dakota did with their teepees. Speaking of birch bark, what is birch bark, Will?
Bark of a birch tree.
The bark of the birch tree. Next we have migration. We hear about migration in lots of different ways. What does migration mean? Izzy?
Moving from one region or country to another.
Yeah, moving from one region or country to another one. So it could be the birds flying south, moving from the north to the south in the wintertime where it's warmer. Could be people migrating from one country to another. Could be just moving around areas. So we talked about the Dakota and how they followed the buffalo. They were migrating wherever the buffalo were going. We're going to find out how the Ojibwe migrated. Wild rice. Tristan.
Shallow, tall grass that grows in shallow water, and wild rice is an important plant to the Ojibwe.
Yeah, so it's a tall grass that grows in the water, and they take the grains of it to get the rice grains, and that was a very important plant to the Ojibwe. Maple sugar. Maddie.
Sweet substance made by boiling sap from the maple tree.
Yeah, they take the sap from the maple tree and they boil it down, and they get that sweet substance. They can get the sugar from it. You can use that to make maple syrup. So it all comes from the sap of the tree. Now, in the other class, somebody asked, well, once they take the sap out, does the tree make more? Yes, it does. Think about if you've ever heard of somebody going and donating blood, going to a blood drive where you donate blood for them to use in the hospitals. Your body naturally makes more blood. Okay? You don't lose your blood and then you don't get it back. Your body just creates more. Same thing with the plants. They create more. So the maple tree will create more sap in it. Next is corn. Katie.
The most important crop to the Ojibwe.
Yeah, it's the most important crop to the Ojibwe. We've all seen cornfields. We know what corn is, but we're going to learn why it was the most important crop to the Ojibwe. Alliance. What is an alliance? Caitlin.
An agreement made between two or more nations or allies.
Yeah, it's an agreement made between two or more groups. Could be countries. During the World Wars, there was a lot of alliances made. Could be between the different nations, the Indian nations. We're going to protect each other. We're going to look out for one another. We're going to be friends and allies. It could be playing a video game and you have allies that you look out for one another. And then we have sovereign. What does it mean to be sovereign? Zoe. Self-ruling and independent. If you're a sovereign nation, you have your own rule. There's not another country that rules over you, that you have to obey their rules. So before we start reading, I'm going to introduce something that we're going to be doing as the week goes on. I don't have the papers for us yet, but I want us to be thinking about it so we are prepared for this. We're going to do a little project. It's kind of a fun project to help us with our learning. As our chapter goes on, we're going to learn about what the Ojibwe did in the springtime, in the summertime, in the fall, and in the winter. So the 4 seasons, they do different things. So we're going to, in our table groups, there are 4 people at our tables. So we're going to each get a piece of a puzzle, and we're going to create a puzzle piece for your season. So everybody at the table is going to be assigned a season: spring, summer, fall, or winter. And on your season, you're going to put pictures that relate to what they do during that season. You're going to write words, sentences that relate to what they do during that season. Labeling your season, you can use the Ojibwe label. Okay, we're going to learn some more of those Ojibwe words. So as we're reading this week about the different seasons, I want you really paying attention to, if that's the season you get assigned, that you know what to put on your puzzle piece. Then we're going to put all the pieces together to make the Ojibwe season's posters. Our friends at home will also be assigned because they have a spot at our tables. So when they come back to school, they will put their puzzle piece with the rest of the table's puzzle pieces. So it'll fit right in. It'll be waiting for them when they come back to add to the poster. So I will be making a Google Classroom assignment for people that are remote learning so that they will be able to get the puzzle pieces. They can print it out at home if they're able to print out at home. Otherwise, they'll have to work on that puzzle piece when they return if they're not able to print it out at home. And just make sure that they have a good idea of what to put on it. So when they come back that day, they'll be able to finish their puzzle piece to include onto their group's poster. So like I said, as the week goes on, we're going to be learning about the different seasons, and then you're going to be assigned your season, and we're going to have our posters done. Hopefully, as our people come back from being at home, we'll be able to have the posters totally complete by Thanksgiving, by next week. So we have this week, we'll learn about our seasons, and then we have Monday and Tuesday of next week to finish our posters. We'll be finishing up with this chapter, so it's going to go pretty quick. All right, so let's look at page 54, People of the Woods and Water. Page 54. The Ojibwe migrated through lands of towering pines, blue lakes, and cold streams. As they moved from place to place, they found what they needed in the natural world around them. Where they lived, what they did, and what they ate changed with the seasons. They valued giving back whenever they took something from the natural world, so they offered gifts of tobacco and food in thanks to the animals and plants they harvested and shared. So think about what we know about Minnesota. We live here. We know it. Our different seasons are very different. What you have access to in the summer is very different than what you have access to in the winter. So each of their seasons are very distinct on what they took care of, what they did. So each of our puzzle pieces will look very different because it's different things, that the environment is different. So what they harvest, what they do is going to be different. Preserving the Ojibwe language. The Ojibwe people call their language Anishinaabe. It is very complex with more than 6,000 verb forms. The language does not always translate exactly into English. Many Ojibwe believe that to truly understand Ojibwe history and culture, you must learn the language. Because it doesn't translate well, you have to know the language to truly understand what it means. Ojibwe elders know the language and traditions best. Many people fear that as the elders die, this knowledge will be lost. Some Ojibwe leaders have started new programs to keep the language alive. At language immersion schools, students learn almost all subjects in the Ojibwe language. Some of the teachers are elders who are passing on the tradition so that one day the youngest generation will be able to do the same. Classes in Ojibwe are also becoming more common in Minnesota's colleges and universities. Bemidji State University has been a leader in this subject for many years. It introduced the nation's first college-level Ojibwe program in 1971. So think about it this way. Mr. Gambino's family came over from Italy. So they want to keep their Italian culture alive. We go there and there's certain things at their house that's very Italian way of doing things. The food that they prepare is authentic Italian, how they make it. They speak the language at their house. His dad grew up in Italy, so he speaks the language quite well. That's his natural language. They can go back to Italy and get that full culture going back to Italy. We've gone to Italy to visit his family over there, and we see what it means to be Italian, to live in the Italian world. But think about the Ojibwe. They don't have a whole country that's all their culture. They don't have that. None of the Indian nations have that one area that's all their culture. So it's important to hold on to that culture, to keep it alive. You can't just go back to a country for it. You can't go to Germany to learn about the German culture. They have to keep that Ojibwe culture going. They have to keep the traditions, the oral histories, learning about it. They don't want it to die off as the elders die off. They want to keep passing it down from generation to generation. Nick? Very cool. Right now? Oh, that is so cool. So if you see him like for the holidays, like over Thanksgiving or over Christmas, make sure you ask him about different things he's learning. I would love to be able to include some stuff. So if you can, get some stories from him that we can share with the class. Because that's the best way to learn about the culture, is taking a whole college course dedicated to Ojibwe culture. You're going to learn a ton, which is very cool. Finn?
So, considering your relatives are from Italy, does that mean they eat a ton of spaghetti?
We eat a lot of pasta, not just spaghetti. A lot of pasta, yes. And actually, last year for Christmas, Gianna got a pasta maker, so now she's making her own pasta. All right, page 55, fishing. The Ojibwe have always lived near lakes, so it makes sense that fishing is an important part of their culture. They developed fishing skills during their years living in lands to the east. These skills served them well as they began to settle in the lake regions of northern and central Minnesota. During the warm months of the year, Ojibwe women did most of the fishing. Usually, they used weighted nets that hung straight down in the water. The women set their nets at night and hauled in their catches early in the morning. Sometimes they used other fishing tools such as spears, traps, and hooks. The Ojibwe either cooked and ate the fresh fish or dried it for eating during the winter. During the cold months, men did much of the fishing. They cut holes in the ice and tried to attract fish using lures made of wood and birch bark. A fisherman would lie flat on the ice with his face over the opening. When a fish came close to the hole, the fisherman speared it. Today, fishing remains an important activity for the Ojibwe. Sometimes they fish using the traditional methods explained here. Other times they fish in boats using the latest equipment and technology. So sometimes it's like the fishing that you do. Sometimes they go back to how they did it hundreds of years ago when they didn't have the same technology that we have now. Now, Mateo has a lot of friends who are Hmong. The Hmong people came from the Vietnam and Cambodia, Laos, that area in Asia. And after the Vietnam War, because they had helped, they were big allies for the American soldiers, they had to leave Vietnam because they were being persecuted because they had helped the Americans. So a lot of the Hmong people came over to the United States. They migrated. And we have a large population here in Minnesota. Started off in St. Paul and now in Blaine, where my kids go to high school. There's a large population has moved into that area. And he was out with one of his friends this weekend, and his friend asked him, "Oh, do you go fishing?" And he's like, "Well, I mean, I've gone fishing a couple of times, and I went up to a friend's cabin, but my family, we don't go fishing a lot." Mr. Gambino being from Chicago, fishing wasn't big for him growing up. So he's like, "We don't really do it." And his friend said, "Oh my goodness, we fish all the time." Because back when they lived by Vietnam, there's a lot of water there. So that's where they got their food. So now that they're in Minnesota, they keep that alive. They keep that part of their culture going, and it's very important to them. It's the same thing with the Ojibwe. Think about where the Ojibwe started. Last week we learned where the Ojibwe lived before they came to Minnesota. Who remembers where they lived? Katie?
Didn't they live by the ocean?
They lived by the ocean, way out on the East Coast. So way out on the East Coast, and then they traveled the St. Lawrence Waterway and through all of the Great Lakes to get to Minnesota. So it didn't go quickly traveling by canoe through the water. They had 7 different times they stopped and they stayed for a while. They were always by water. So you get your food from water. There's lots of seafood that they could catch along the way. When they lived out by the ocean, they were by the water. Coming to Minnesota, they were always by water. In Minnesota, they're by water. So that water is very important to their culture. Fishing was very important. They know how to fish. They know how to get food. That was important for them. It's very important to them today. So they hold on to that part of their culture. They use some of their traditional methods like they did 300, 400 years ago. Sometimes they use the modern technology. Sometimes they use both together. So it just all depends on what kind of fishing experience that they're wanting to have. But fishing is very important in all seasons. So as we're learning about the different seasons, we're not going to learn about fishing in each season because we just learned about it in this section. So fishing is important in all the seasons. Is fishing in winter different than fishing in the summer?
Yes.
How is it different, Paisley?
Because the ice is frozen on the lake, and in the summer it's just regular water.
Yeah, because in the wintertime we have all the ice, so it's ice fishing. Very different laying on top of the ice trying to catch the fish, right? Than being in a boat or standing in the water trying to spear the fish. Very different. So ice fishing versus summertime fishing are different, but still very important. All right, we're going to learn about springtime or Zigwan today. So on page 56, it talks about the spring. Melting snow and ice marked the beginning of spring called Zigwan in Ojibwe. As the weather turned warmer, Ojibwe families packed their belongings onto sleds and toboggans and left the protective pine forest where they had spent the winter. They traveled to where the maple trees grew. This was the sugar camp, where the Ojibwe turned sap from the maples into sugar and syrup. So think about that. In the wintertime, they're living in the pine forest. Do pine trees lose their leaves in the winter? No, they keep it. So it keeps them isolated so they stay warmer. Okay, so they live where the big pine trees are because it helps block down all of that cold wind. It helps keep some of the snow away. So in the wintertime, they live in the pine forests because it helps protect them. Now it's springtime, so now they're coming out of their wigwams and they're going, oh, it smells good, it feels good. It's time to go to the spring camp, that sugar camp, where the maple trees are. The journey to the sugar camp was usually an exciting and happy event. Families who had not seen each other all winter joined together and continued on their way. They swapped stories and marveled at how much their children had grown. As friends and relatives reunited,
Please pardon this interruption, teachers. I need the following students to come to the office. Genevieve Drew, Camille Fredine, John Gallagher, Tony Cook, Kate Vettel, Izzy Schmidt, Maddie Schmidt, Anthony Van, Jillian Anderson, Kate Brenner, Elin Bernovic, Gigi Deely, Tatum Hachaba, Logan Higgins, Ella Klepacki, Bennett Keir, Ethan Jones, Tegan Miller, Raziki Momani, Audrey Olmsted, Nora Ryland, Isabel Schlafer, Lucy Schmidt,
oh my goodness.
and Mario Trapiccio.
All right, so you three can head to the office. Okay, so think about what life was like. They were living in the pine forest. They were separated Think about what it's like in the middle of freezing cold winter. You stay inside, right? They're not going to be going out and rolling around in the snow all day. They didn't have the big, huge snow gear like we have now, so they didn't spend all of their time outside. They stayed inside, especially when it was that super cold January and February. So now it's getting warm and they get to go outside. Think about what it's like in your neighborhood. In the wintertime, you might see people and wave to people, but you're not hanging out outside a whole lot. You might play outside in your yard. You might see the neighbors somewhat, but it's not the same as in the springtime when the snow melts and people go outside and they have barbecues and they hang out on their driveways. And I live in a cul-de-sac, so we're out in the middle of the circle talking with the neighbors, watching the kids play, riding bikes, roller skating. So we're outside seeing each other. But in the wintertime, I don't see my neighbors that much. We kind of wave to each other as we're hustling into our houses because it's cold out. So it's the same thing for the Ojibwe. Now it's springtime. Now they're outside. They're so excited to see one another after the long, cold winter. So they have all the stories to show, oh, this happened this winter, and oh, so-and-so lost their tooth, and so-and-so started walking. All of the stories that they want to share. So it's an exciting time to be back with one another again. So they're traveling to their sugar camp. And once the families arrived at the sugar camp, they repaired existing lodges and built new ones. Some were used as homes and others as workplaces. While the men went out to hunt, the women began the process of making maple sugar, which they called zizibawan. They went through the maple grove, cutting a gash in the trunk of each tree. Then they inserted a wooden spout into each gash. Before long, sap began dripping from the spout and into a birch bark container. Then came the job of turning the sap into sugar. From sunrise to sunset, boys and girls ran back and forth, delivering containers of sap to the sugar house. The sugar house was a large structure made of wooden poles and covered with bark. Inside, the children poured the sap into kettles set over burning fires. As the sap boiled down, it turned into sugar. As a reward for their work, the children were allowed to eat some of the sugar. The older women stored the remaining sugar in birch bark containers for later use. The sugar would provide energy throughout the year. Another important springtime task was making canoes. First, the Ojibwe constructed a frame from cedar, a strong but lightweight wood. Then they wrapped birch bark around the bottom and sides of the frame and sewed it tight using twine made of spruce roots. Lastly, they sealed the seams in the birch with spruce gum. Women did some of this work while men did other parts. Young boys and girls helped too, learning the craft from their elders. So they learn as they do it. They don't read in a book how to do it. There's not a set of instructions on what to do. They learn by doing it. So the older people are teaching the younger people how to make the canoes, how to repair the canoes, so they can keep having canoes. And when the young people grow up, they're going to be teaching the next group of young people. So it's that cycle of teaching. So what do you think it was easy making the maple sugar? No. There's a lot of back and forth. They're filling up these buckets, these pails with the sap. Then they have to bring it all the way to the sugar house. Well, it's a whole woods full of maple trees. Not like they're all just right around the house. They're spread out. And remember, for a bucket of sap, they boil it down, they reduce it down, and you only get a little bit of end product of that sugar, of the syrup. So they need to boil down a lot of sap in order to have enough of that maple sugar to make that maple syrup, to use it with what they need it for throughout the whole entire year. It's not just to be used that week. This needs to last them for the whole year. So it's a big process. A lot of back and forth, running with the pails, a lot of being inside that sugar, what did they call it, a sugar house? Yeah, sugar house, where they're boiling it down. Do you think it's cool in the sugar house? No, because they have all these fires burning to boil down the syrup. So it's hot. You're running around a lot. So these kids are working. They're learning how to keep this going, and they're working hard. It's not, oh, it's springtime, I want to go play with my friends I haven't seen. No, you're working. They were an important part. The kids had played an important role in the Ojibwe culture. Nick, was it your hand that I saw up? No, I thought I saw somebody's hand up. Gregory.
Yeah, so my mom lives out in Global Sense.
Okay.
Don't see anybody there, even in the summertime.
Yeah, it all depends on who lives there. All right, page 57 has Ojibwe place names in Minnesota, so we can see where it gets its name. Gitchiziba means great river, so that's how the Mississippi got its name, from the Gitchiziba. Bemidjigamog is the lake where current flows directly across the water, and that's where Bemidji, the city, gets its name. Then we have Winnebegozis, means dirty water. So if you've ever been on a lake where it's kind of murky and muddy and you can't really see down to the bottom well, that's the dirty water. Lake Winnebago's, I'm assuming, is kind of a murky lake. It's not a clear lake where you can see straight down to the bottom. Gitchigumi means Great Lake. So that's Lake Superior. It's a great lake. And if you actually go up to Duluth, you'll see Gitchigumi. There's the Gitchigumi Trail. I know in soccer, there's the Gitchigumi Soccer Club. So Gitchigumi is still used a lot in that area. Tristan.
I haven't been to Lake Superior once or twice, and I've heard that name lots and lots of times.
Gitchigumi is definitely used a lot near
Yeah,
Duluth.
I even heard it when I was visiting the Lake Superior Lighthouse in Split Rock.
Yep. Yeah, because it's right on Lake Superior, which is the Gitchigumi. It's the Great Lake.
And Split Rock Lighthouse is named after a river.
Okay.
And there was a cliff nearby it that a ship crashed into.
Yes. Katie.
And
Katie.
I've also been there and also Lake Superior, and I've been to Split Rock Lighthouse, but I really didn't hear that.
Really? So the next time you go up to Duluth, listen for it. And you'll be surprised when you do hear it, because it is up there a lot.
Mr. Reed, is he here?
No, he's in the other room.
Of course he is, because I'm in here.
Yep. Then after the Gitchigumi, we have Monoman, which is the wild rice. And we have Monoman is a city here in Minnesota. So a lot of our areas are named after these Ojibwe words that were very important. So we're going to stop there. We're not going to read about summer yet. Like I said, as we read, we need to be thinking about what are the important things for that season. So what was something important about springtime? Zoe? Maple sugar. Having maple trees, making maple sugar. So that would be something we'd want on our puzzle piece. Briggs. Making and repairing canoes. Caitlin.
Restoring houses and building new ones.
Yeah, restoring the houses in that sugar camp. Making new houses. Okay, so that camp is there from year to year because the maple trees are there from year to year. So the houses need to be repaired that they're going to be using. With that, I'm going to say goodbye to my friends at home. And we hope that you have a good day.